For his entire career, DeMar DeRozan has been one of the most exciting players to watch in the NBA. His speed, jumping ability, and creativity have drawn comparisons to legendary athletes like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. In fact, so has his size and his play style in general. Many people have said that, in terms of play style alone, DeRozan is the most similar player to Michael Jordan we've seen since the man himself. Beyond play style, however, the similarities basically disappear. DeRozan has never won a championship, and his career is noticeably lacking in accolades altogether. However, he did win an Olympic gold medal in 2016, and in a career spanning over a decade, DeRozan has amassed a net worth of over $20 million and been an inspiration to youth around the world. This would be amazing no matter what, but what makes DeRozan truly unique is his improbable backstory. DeRozan's rise to basketball stardom is one of the most inspiring in the NBA, and where he and his family are now couldn't be more different from where they started. DeMar was born on August 7th, 1989 in Compton, California. If you don't already know, Compton is a city just south of downtown Los Angeles. Since the 1960s, it has been one of the most dangerous cities in the US and the epicenter of gang violence between the Bloods and Crips. Combined, both gangs have been estimated to have as many as 50,000 members between them, making them two of the biggest street gangs ever. Around the time that DeMar was growing up, his city was in the news fairly often. Crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s hit Compton as hard as any city in the US. When DeMar was just 3 years old, his city erupted in rioting after the police beating of Rodney King. The riots lasted 6 days and resulted in over 60 deaths, more than 2,000 injuries, and an incredible 7,000 fires. More than 3,000 businesses were damaged, and the total cost of the rioting was over $1 billion. The rioting came after years and years of similar police tactics that were commonplace but rarely reported, let alone prosecuted. DeMar was also born around the same time and in the same city as the rap group NWA. NWA's experience growing up together in Compton is what inspired most of their lyrics, which shed additional light on the city's situation. DeMar's parents were Frank and Diane DeRozan. He is an only child. Diane chose the name DeMar as a variation of the name of her younger brother Lamar. Lamar DeRozan was tragically killed long before DeMar was born. At the young age of just 20, he was killed in a drive-by shooting. Diane chose the name DeMar to honor her lost brother. She has since been open about the fact that she was both grateful to be a parent and afraid to be one, considering the dangers of the environment in which DeMar was to be raised. DeMar took a liking to basketball pretty much right away. As a toddler, he always wanted his parents to take him down to Looters Park so he could dribble around. According to his father, Frank, most public parks in Compton were run by gangs back then. Frank was willing to bring his young son, not wanting to stifle his early passion, but was extremely protective and never let DeMar out of his sight for even a second. When DeMar was 5, tragedy struck the family a second time. Another uncle of DeMar's, Kevin DeRozan, was shot and killed by rival gang members from the Bloods. The young DeMar knew his Uncle Kevin well. He remembers his uncle being one of the biggest Crips in Compton. A large funeral was held for Kevin, and DeMar remembers the outpouring of people who showed up, describing it as being like a parade. This raises some questions about how involved the DeRozan family was with the Crips. Understandably, it's not something people are always willing to talk publicly about. Gangs are always secretive about their operations and their members for obvious reasons. But according to DeMar, who has been more open about it than most, gangs were everywhere and involved in everything, and clearly, he had direct connections as well. DeMar remembers watching friends on all sides get caught up in drugs, gambling, crime, and even end up in funeral caskets. Yet, DeMar was able to stay in school and eventually become a wealthy star. DeMar deserves most of the credit for this, as do his parents. But it's been speculated that he may have had outside help as well. The Crips had a ton of power and influence, especially back then. They ran the community. Based on his family ties and his promising basketball talent, it's possible the Crips offered DeMar and his family special protection. What this would mean is hard to say. It would be very strange if an NBA player owed part of his success to a notorious street gang, but it could very well be the case. DeMar once tweeted that he wore blue, the color of the Crips, every day in high school. When DeMar was in 7th grade, his father Frank had a stroke. He was taken to the hospital and in critical condition when DeMar arrived to see him. At first, it looked like it was going to be the last time he would see his father, but an emotional Frank DeRozan told DeMar that he refused to die until he saw his son make it. DeMar realized that from a very young age, that basketball presented him with a unique opportunity he wasn't going to find anywhere else. This motivated him to focus his attention on being the best player he could be and working as hard as possible. Also, despite the dangers in his neighborhood and the violence that continued to directly affect his friends and family, DeMar was lucky to have 2 supportive parents who also wanted his basketball career to flourish and were willing to help out any way they could. DeMar's passion for basketball only grew as he got older. He began playing competitively as soon as he was old enough, and by the time he was in 6th grade, he could already dunk. His potential was obvious, and everyone assumed that he would enroll at Manuel Dominguez High School. This was a fairly famous high school in the area that was well known for producing NBA players. He could have easily gotten in. But even at just 13 or 14, DeMar was already thinking about owning his backstory. He decided to enroll at Compton High School instead, telling the assistant coach there that he wanted to put Compton on the map. That he did. Today, DeMar DeRozan is still the only notable NBA player to have attended Compton High School. He averaged close to 30 points as a freshman. By the time DeMar was old enough to drive, he was ranked as one of the top 10 high school players in the country. He earned scholarships to play at just about any college he wanted to. DeMar picked his dream university just a half-hour drive away, USC. During his senior year of high school, tragedy struck for DeMar yet again. During a dice game, his best friend Davion Childs was shot and killed on the street. DeMar wasn't there at the time, but he says he felt a lot of guilt and responsibility because of it. Having already attended more funerals than he could bear, DeMar couldn't bring himself to attend Davion's funeral. The loss was just too painful. The following year, starting as a freshman at USC, DeMar discovered that he was still the best player on just about every court he stepped on. He started every game he played for the Trojans, and the team made it to the second round of March Madness in 2009, with DeMar as one of their leading scorers. Though he's shown on the court, off the court, DeMar says he felt like a total outsider. Even though it was so close to his hometown, college felt like it was in a different world. He says he felt like he didn't know how to communicate with his peers. Many of them had also grown up in LA, but in different areas where life was completely different from his. It was pretty much a done deal that DeMar would make it to the NBA, and that same year, he was picked 9th overall by the Toronto Raptors. At 20 years old, DeMar was the same age as his namesake Uncle Lamar had been when he was killed all those years ago. Now, a DeRozan had finally made it out of the worst streets of Compton and all the way to the NBA. The first thing DeMar did after getting drafted was give his father a check for $400,000. He told him, "Dad, you don't have to live by the railroad tracks anymore." DeMar himself had to move, not only out of California, but out of the United States altogether. Toronto was a major city around the same size as Los Angeles, but that's about all the two places have in common. Moving to Toronto meant getting a new passport and being more than 2,000 miles away from the place DeMar called home for his entire life. He's also had to adjust to being in a completely different financial position. Not only was DeMar moving from LA to Toronto, he was also moving from poverty to elite wealth. Right away, DeMar was making more than $2 million a year. It's sadly common for people from humble backgrounds to blow their money irresponsibly when they suddenly make it rich. In fact, it's sadly common for rich people in general, no matter their background. But from day one, DeMar DeRozan has been both wise and exceedingly generous with his earnings. In addition to the $400,000 check, DeMar also bought his parents nice cars, and he continues to donate to Compton High School to this day. At Luders Park in Compton, a basketball gym was recently renamed after DeMar, and every summer, he flies back to host a basketball camp for young kids in the neighborhood. In his rookie NBA season, DeMar quickly began attracting attention. The most impressive thing most people noticed was his athleticism. DeMar earned a spot in the 2010 Slam Dunk Contest, where he ended up in the final round against Nate Robinson. Robinson ended up winning by only 1% of the voting, but it put DeMar on the map for many NBA fans who were yet to hear of him. DeMar continued to find himself in the spotlight after the Raptors star player, Chris Bosh, left for Miami to form the infamous Big Three. This left DeMar in the position of being the team's star player. After a few years in the NBA, DeMar's game started to mature, and the Raptors started looking like serious playoff contenders again. In 2014, the team finished 3rd overall in the Eastern Conference, and while they lost to the Brooklyn Nets in the first round, they pushed the series to 7 games. DeMar was far and away the best player on the Raptors at the time, and he continued to get better as a team leader. His name started coming up more and more in the All-Star conversation. DeMar made the All-Star game for the first time in 2014. He did it again in 2016 and 2017, and in 2018, he made his last All-Star appearance as a Raptor. That's because, a few months later, in July of 2018, DeMar was traded to the San Antonio Spurs. This would have spelled tragedy for Canadian basketball fans, except for the fact that it meant another star player would take his place in Toronto. Kawhi Leonard is a weirdly accurate replacement for DeMar. Like DeRozan, Leonard was born and raised in Los Angeles and chose to attend college in his home state. He's also drawn comparisons to Michael Jordan, both for his play style and his physical attributes. Leonard is 2 years younger than DeRozan and was drafted 2 years later. But again, like DeRozan, he was selected in the first round. As similar as the two seem on paper, there are some notable differences too. Whereas DeMar grew up in the worst areas of the hood in Compton, Leonard grew up in Moreno Valley, a much quieter and safer area. Even though they're both technically from LA, their backgrounds are actually quite different. The other, more obvious difference is that Leonard managed to win a championship in Toronto, the only one the city has ever gotten. This had to have bothered DeRozan, who worked as hard as he could for almost 10 years to do what Leonard did in just one. Sadly, this younger version of DeRozan has probably overshadowed much of his legacy in Toronto. That's a shame, because the story of DeMar DeRozan is an absolutely remarkable one. It's easy to make the case that DeRozan is one of the most physically gifted athletes the league has ever seen, and he couples his talent with a uniquely strong character. During the ceremony, when DeRozan's name was being added to the gym in Luders Park, a local kid from Compton told a reporter that DeRozan was his favorite player, saying, "If he can do it, I know I can." This reflects the attitude that a lot of kids growing up in Compton share. DeRozan's story is an inspiration, and the fact that he remains so active in the community just gives that much more hope to everyone growing up in that same environment. DeRozan once told ESPN that if it hadn't been for basketball, he truly has no idea what he would have done or where he would have ended up. "I had no other options," he said. Helping other youth to avoid this kind of situation is clearly a passion for DeRozan. Given the chance to become a wealthy star in another city, many would take the opportunity to erase the memory of their difficult upbringing. DeMar has done exactly the opposite. He remains a role model, not just for young kids, but other NBA players who feel more encouraged to represent their own backstories and share them openly with the NBA community. Today, DeRozan has close to 650,000 Twitter followers, but listed above his posts about new signature Nikes and multi-million-dollar contracts, he still has the same simple bio as he always has, and probably always will. Born and raised in Compton. We hope you enjoy learning about the story of DeMar DeRozan. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click the notification bell so you don't miss any great content like this. Catch you in the next video.